All right. And at some point later tonight, we're going to look at this guy, Guy de
Guy.
Rothschild. Because
Oh,
we
there's
were
some
talking
juicy
about Baron
stuff.
Philippe last night, but I didn't have
Yeah.
that book upstairs. And we broke this book out. And then, there's a couple other deep dive type things we'll
Yeah,
do
you showed me
later.
Baron. I have Baron's book right here. I'm gonna go through that during the clips.
Yeah,
Guy's book
Baron
was
Philippe is
unbelievable.
10x the Guy de
Yeah,
Rothschild,
I
but
mean
they're all interesting takes on their family
the
history.
first thing I opened up was about how William of Hesse was freaking out about his money. And I
Yeah.
was like, wow, you have this whole thing starred and highlighted. I gotta
Baron
read this
Philippe
part.
de Rothschild, he tells one of the best. He's a good
There's some
narrative.
things that I'm kind of most afraid to say.
There's a
So
lot in there, yeah. Especially these days, you can't just read books anymore. It's dangerous, dangerous. Thought crimes. How dare you
how am I
look at
gonna keep
history
my money
books
when
written by the
Napoleon's
people who made history? I did find that tweet from Scotty Horton, and it followed a tweet from him posting about James Bamford's new book. So maybe it does have something to do with the tweet that came before it. I just saw this in my Twitter feed, and it reads, supporting Israel is not in America's national interest. I was like, how dare he speak clearly the facts that are so obvious in a time like this? It's pretty dangerous. And as you see right now, it has 666 likes. Well, no, that's pretty ominous. All right. So the point is that's a claim made today, right? And it might have something to do with this James Bamford book. I don't know. I haven't read it, but that's a claim made today. So I want to bring some history and artifacts to bear because Tony and I were talking about these books last night, and that tweet just showed up today. It's a little synchronicitous.
I just actually ended up buying this because I even found the Baron one as well
That's right.
for
Because I told
a
Tony I'm about to
cheap
talk
one.
about these books. They are still available. There's only a couple copies. And once I do this, you guys are going to buy them out. So here is book one. Now, this isn't the book we were looking for, but this is the book I had upstairs because the book we were looking for was down here in the studio. So I'm going to show that to you next. This is a book called The Whims of Fortune, The Memoirs of Guy de Rothschild. And this is from the Austin Public Library, but they didn't need it anymore. So they discarded it. And friend's book sale, somebody bought that up and sold it to me on the open market. So books like this are still out there. Here's a nice little genealogy if you need to understand the French Rothschilds and generations 1, 2, 3, and 4. There you have it in a picture, and I could even do it full screen for you guys. Wait, hold on. Here we go. Something like that. Get my cursor off that screen. All right. It's very tidy, helps you, because there's a lot of names to learn, a lot of grammar. These are the individual parts, how they fit together and how they work together. Or we'll just close. Oh, wait, more pages. Sorry about that. More generations. Okay. Just a few more names. And the Whims of Fortune begins. Much ado about money. We don't have to read the first 164 pages, but I thought we'd just jump in over here. He's talking about he's talking about Arthur Kessler.
Wow, we were
And
talking about him last week. Yeah.
right. Some interesting friends like Freddie A.J. Ayer
AJ
from
Iyer.
Oxford, right?
And that's how he's
From
one of the
Oxford.
key components or proponents, rather, of logical positivism, which is a very dubious philosophy, to say the least, of the analytic tradition of the 20th century.
And then he met George Orwell, famous for the sinister view of the world portrayed in his book 1984. Tall, gaunt, hollow-cheeked, taciturn, and shy, he wasn't very sociable. Moreover, he viewed the future through glasses as black as the ink in which he dipped his pen. Interesting, but that's not why we're here in this book. There was a couple passages back here.
Oh yeah, about the
this part of the book. Let's see. This is a famous
that's about
part.
the ball.
Let's see. Yeah, this is
if
you guys have ever seen this the Surrealist Ball from 1972. It was Guy de Rothschild and his wife Marie Helene who had planned the whole soiree, as they say over there. Right? That's party. That means party. It was, I think that was Better Off Dead. Soiree, or maybe it was one of those other movies. All right, so page 276. He goes into great detail on how that party was set up and all the shenanigans that went on at that party. That's also not why we're in this book. We're going back here. This concept of noblesse oblige
that's what we were reading last night. Yeah,
is also expressed in the next book we're going to see. So it's a constant theme through memoirs within the Rothschild family. According to an old French motto, noblesse oblige. One must live up to one's name. The Rothschilds' condition of life has imposed on them a second motto, richesse oblige. One must live up to one's fortune. I hope they have succeeded in living up to both their name and their wealth. All right, well that's interesting, but that's still not why we're here in this book. Oh, here's some pages here. Let's see. Oh, he's talking about Palestine. Okay, let's go over. Let's go over here. Let's see.
I need to move the book just a little
I'm
bit.
sorry. Yeah, sorry. I gotta let me adjust production needs here. This isn't a $50 million operation like the Crowder people. Let's see. This is talking about anti-Zionist. No, that's not it. Jews in Russia. Rothschild was the commune. No, that's not it. Oh, here it is. On the whole, let's just get this just a little bit higher so you can see the whole part of the page. On the whole, my family had always adopted a reserved attitude toward Zionism. My great uncle Edmund had acted on his own in generously supporting Jewish Palestine for reasons more humanitarian and religious than political. But the devastation caused by the war and the extermination of 6 million Jews radically changed all our former attitudes. So Hitler convinced them to colonize Palestine starting in 1890. That's what he's. I myself became an ardent Zionist without, however, envisaging a change in direction of my personal life and that of my family. The word Zionist can thus lead to confusion because it can refer to a supporter of the state of Israel as well as a person prepared to immigrate there. In 1945, I made a trip to the Middle East with an official mission to report my findings. On that occasion, I met David Ben-Gurion, who a couple years later becomes the first prime minister of Israel for the first time in Jerusalem. He asked me if I was a Zionist. He was a man who appreciated precision. I hesitated to reply. He added, "Do you want to bring up your son here?" So he adds to it, but Ben-Gurion at this point knows the history of the Rothschild family going back almost 100 years in this development. So he's just asking if this particular Rothschild is in it to win it. Again, it goes down, mentions Arthur Kessler. That's a whole different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
The Zionist dream at the time identified itself with Israel, a national home for the Jewish people, a just and democratic society, a pioneer spirit, a passionate quest for a new set of values. The negative aspects of the experience would appear only later. On the day of Israel's declaration of independence in May 1948, Alex and I expressed our enthusiasm marching arm in arm up the Champs-Élysées, along with Madame Mendez France, whom we happened to meet in the crowd. So he's talking about the development of his uncle Edmund in Palestine in that whole project. So that's the end. I mean, I could take you through more, but that's the thread that I'm going to continue over here in this next book called Baron Phillpe, a very candid autobiography of Baron Phillpe de Rothschild. And this is also a former library book that was discarded. I guess they don't, I mean, it's known to the library, but it shouldn't be known to you. Now, it starts out with the family history going back to Hesse and the William of Hesse. He got his money because his dad got money from the British Empire to send Hessian soldiers over here to fight in the American Revolution. Meyer Amschel makes some money. Now, this is Baron Phillpe telling his family's history and story. So it's all very interesting, and each memoir tells it slightly differently. But I mean,
That one's particularly candid.
This book,
that title is actually accurate. So
yeah, I mean, if I just go to the wide shot here, I mean, this book got a lot of juice in it, you know. So you gotta squeeze it, you gotta highlight it, you gotta take some notes. But these pages are not why we're here. I want to see over here. Baron Rothschild, Uncle James. Let's see, Uncle James, and then Napoleon's. Okay, so this is the section about cousin Edmund. Okay, so this is matching up. So we're going to get to Edmund de Rothschild, who was just referred to by Guy de Rothschild in the colonization of Palestine. We're going to go to page 46 here of Baron Phillpe. And we're going to start here in the middle. The brothers never forgot that they were Jews. We made our fortune as Jews, Jews we remain, said Solomon. And they never lost an opportunity to further the Jewish cause. Even said, elder brother Amschel was instrumental in abolishing the laws forbidding intermarriage in Prussia. Nathaniel's brother, Lionel, was the first Jew to take his seat in the British Parliament without renouncing his faith. It took him 11 years. Now, let me go a little bit closer in on this so you can see it. Took him 11 years. 3 times he was elected by the city of London, and 3 times he had refused admittance because he would not take the oath as a Christian. I will swear as a Jew or not at all, he said. In 1863, thanks to the tireless efforts of the Whig Lord John Russell and the Tory Benjamin Disraeli, well, they helped Disraeli become prime minister, and with their help, they get the Suez Canal. So they had some allies that helped make this happen, and it was a triumph for British Jewry. Now over here, this is the Suez Canal that I just referred to, but I want to get to this part. Lionel was the perfect specimen of a second-generation wealth. Better educated, better spoken, better behaved than his father. He had become the smooth operator par excellence. In the 1890s, Lionel's French cousin Edmund was buying tracts of land in Palestine to harbor refugees from Poland. He had no Zionist ideals at the time. Like all the Rothschilds, he believed that you had to pay for what you got, and that was that. Zionism, he said, is an American Jew giving money to an English Jew to bring a Polish Jew over to Palestine.
Oh my God.
That is a quote from Baron
God.
Phillpe de Rothschild on page 47 of a book you can go get for $10 right now. And that's pretty interesting, but it gets better. His friends suggested Abyssinia, Argentina, or even Lakeside Chicago as a Jewish national home. But Edmund went on buying bits of Palestine, then ran them like a dictator. In his declining years, he moved closer to Zionism. In 1914, on his last visit, he was weak now. Let's see. In his last visit, he was deeply moved by the progress of the settlements. I am old and weak now, he told the colonists, but I will send you my son James to you, and he will address you in Hebrew. Nathan's Bank, Newcourt, St. Smithon's Lane, that's where they decide the gold price every day, back up until 2008. London still flourishes. It is the only central bank that determines the price of gold each day, a heritage from Nathan, and everything is still so noiseless and efficient that the only sound one hears is the occasional creak of the floorboards. Carl's branch in Naples was transferred to Frankfurt in 1861 and lasted until 1901. Vienna was taken over by Hitler, and the head of the bank, Louis von Rothschild, was arrested. Louis arranged his own ransom terms with Himmler and left for France. The Paris bank is still there, though in this year of 1981, nationalized. Oh, France took over, huh? Or do you take over France? It's interesting. It's interesting how they
It's like they took over England after the defeat of Napoleon.
No, I thought
That's the whole beginning story of the book.
Oh, here's the noblesse oblige reference in this book. So it's page 299. So both of them talk about it at the end of their book, right? Crystal Palace. Let's see. There might be one other place I wanted to take you in this book, but I think that's the gist for right now on Palestine, at least. And yeah, interesting family history. The reason it came up is because we were talking about it last night at dinner. And I said, it's really fascinating when you get into reading the Rothschild memoirs, biographies, autobiographies, these sort of source materials, because their story's so fascinating. It's like the Corleones. It's like the Godfather. There's undercover crime, there's hijackings, there's spy networks inside of France working against Napoleon right under his nose. There's encryption. There's just all this stuff that you've seen in pop culture in Hollywood movies of like gangsters and big powerful people making moves out there, but to hear them tell it like as part of their family history, it would make a really good series on Netflix.
It shows how some of the most powerful financiers in the entire world came to power by using these sort of clandestine, unscrupulous, morally dubious activities. There's a story by which they're funneling gold to England, and they pay off dignitaries, they pay off the heads of chief of police in France, sending the gold through France. Napoleon controlled France to get it to England. They had so much power and so much networking with the famous story of the five brothers branching out to all these European nations. And they were able to facilitate the movement of large sums of wealth William of Hesse being one, in which to secure, because he kept it all in his own castle when Napoleon was going through. And just hearing that story, going back to the late 18th and the early 19th century, just shows you just how much the mafia becomes these big private corporations or becomes the government itself. And they're just two sides of the same coin. And that's, their origins are rooted in essentially espionage, clandestine activity, and bribing individuals. It's not unlike a lot of what Whitney Webb uncovered and so many other great investigative journalists have uncovered in regards to there are major connections between black markets, mafia, heads of state, major private corporations, and that's sort of, you can see it historically how that was a reality. They tell it themselves, and they tell it in particularly, I mean, Guy is also quite candid, but he's not quite as he's not quite as sophisticated in the way he presents it as Barron does. Barron's very candid and a little bit more sophisticated in the way he goes on describing it. Guy seems a little bit farther removed in regards to being able to express just how deep the connection really goes to what they were able to accomplish.
Well, Baron Philippe's wife was working with Balenciaga back in the 60s. And Guy's wife is the one who held the broken up baby parts on the table masquerade ball. So
the flames of hell outside the,
yeah, I mean, we can bring that up in a second. I wanted to make this point about, yes, they were colonizing Palestine in the 1890s. That is like a very safe number to discuss. Like they're like, oh yeah, it was just going on at the end of the 1800s, not in the 1880s or the 1870s, or even back to 1829 was the first newspaper report. And I've looked into and seen the original of the newspaper that reported it. Now, whether or not the newspaper article is accurate, like if they made something up and it came true in the future, isn't that still substantial? So there's a report in 1829. There's another report. The next one is there's 1835 report as well. And then there's also so these newspapers run in the United States. They report Rothschild interest in colonizing Palestine, working with the Turkish Sultan, these sort of things. So you might say, okay, that's a couple, three news reports from the early 1800s, but that's not enough to be beyond reasonable doubt. Well, then you got the 1841 Colonial Times publishes restoration of the Jews to Palestine. The British Empire is picking up this idea like, hey, we're going to help them go do this. And it's not sealed until the Balfour Declaration, 70 years later, but it's a sign of synergy between two groups, one with a political objective of Zionism and one with a political objective of maybe taking over the whole world. British Empire, now known as a Commonwealth, and just has, and you like, can see how that's votes all in the UN.
That's before 1850. Like there's 4 mentions, so it seems like there had to have been some interest in some capacity, unless all of the news stories somehow were just completely unfounded. They had no reference to it at all. They had no sort of connection to any of the individuals associated with Rothschild at the time.
All right, so here's the newspaper for anyone who was skeptical like 20 seconds ago. Here's the receipt for it. Timothy Hughes, rare and early newspapers. Now this is no longer available because our friend Dan Dix bought it. So I'm pretty sure he has this hard copy, and it reads as follows. November 28th, 1829. Niles Weekly Register, Baltimore, November 28th, 1829. One of the articles within is headed, Jerusalem, with the text beginning, there is a report that the Rothschilds have purchased Jerusalem. We see nothing improbable in that. The pecuniary stress of the Sultan, and it goes on making a point that the Sultan is in great difficulty. Baron Rothschild was proceeding to Constantinople, and a second rebuilding of the temple is not among the most strange things expected in these strange times by some of the Jews. So this is a newspaper article, and whether or not that's an accurate report at the time, or it was rumor or innuendo, the rumor or innuendo must have had something to it, because 100 years later, 120 years later, it becomes the state of Israel. And a lot of colonization happened in between those two parts. So that's just,
putting the Rothschilds buying land in the late 19th century to set up some vineyards there, and it sort of, moved on from there to.
Well, that's interesting because they have the Palestine Exploration Fund. And they also have, what's the other, the Aliyahs.
Yeah.
So let me type in. Now you can find a book called Zionism and Technocracy, the Engineering of Jewish Settlement in Palestine. That's a very interesting book. There's a couple other books on this. There's Hebrew University of Jerusalem had published one. Let's see. I think that one was published by Hebrew University. And then, the Survey of Western Palestine, and then the first Aliyah right here, 1800s. So this is the 1870s. This isn't the 1890s, right? Jewish philanthropists such as the Montefiores and the Rothschilds responded to the persecution of Jews in Europe by sponsoring agricultural settlements for Russian Jews in Palestine. The Jews who migrated during this period, known as the first Aliyah. Aliyah is the Hebrew word meaning ascent, referring to the act of spirituality ascending to the Holy Land in the basic tenet of Zionism. These types of things I don't think are recognized or talked about by people who think the state of Israel was created because of Hitler in World War II.
And if you just look at the
And
wiki,
justifies all the types of things as far as apartheid and policy that we see today.
if you just look at the wiki, they don't even mention that. They don't really start until really after it became a state. They call it pre-modern aliyahs, which I can click on that and see where that goes. Oh, well, they start with the whole. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Zionist aliyah. So it starts with 1882 on. And
Now, there's
Zionist,
the Dreyfus Affair, and Guy and I think Baron Rothschild talk about the Dreyfus Affair and some of these other ideas that were around the persecution of the Eastern Europeans. Sir Moses Montefiore, Moses Hess, also points to them in 1861 in his book, Roman Jerusalem, the Last Nationalist Question. And he points to Montefiore and Rothschild as funders. They also talked about how they took over Freemasonic lodges with their own brand of Freemasonry. And later you get organizations like the British Israel World Federation shortly before the Balfour Declaration, all just hallmarks of synergistic parallel agendas being run. So interesting, the history of Palestine. It is. So when you got
that's very fun. Yeah, I'm just
so if you got Scott Horton making this comment over here, let me get back to the Twitter.
When was the first one you said that you referenced?
1829 was the first article referencing
No,
that.
for Aliyah.
Oh.
Sorry, I'm for Aliyah.
Oh, 1870s.
Yeah, it's interesting. On the wiki article, the pre-whatever Aliyahs, pre-modern Aliyahs, that starts with 1882. Interesting. Between 1882 and 1903, approximately 35,000 Jews immigrated to the Ottoman Palestine, joining the pre-existing Jewish population, which in 1880 numbered 20,000
That's the Sultan,
to 25,000.
right? Ottoman Palestine, the Sultan.
Yeah, Sultan.
That's interesting too.
The Jews immigrated, arrived in groups, and some would recruit most of these groups from areas of Romania and Russia in the 1880s. The migration of Jews from Russia correlates with the end of the Russian pogroms, with about 3% of Jews emigrating from Europe to Palestine. The groups who arrived in Palestine around this time were called Hibatisian, which is a Hebrew word meaning fondness for Zion. They were also called enthusiasts for Zion by the members of the groups themselves. While these groups expressed interest and fondness for Palestine, they were not strong enough in number to encompass an entire mass movement, as would appear later on in other waves of migration. The majority belonging to Ovive Zion and Bilu movements came from the Russian Empire, with a smaller number arriving from Yemen. Many established agricultural communities among the towns of these individuals established Petah Tikva already in 1878, Rishon LeZion, Rosh Pina, and Zikron Yaakov. In 1882, the Yemenite Jews settled an Arab village of Silwan, located southeast of the walls of the old city of Jerusalem and on the slopes of the Mount of Olives. Kurdish Jews settled in Jerusalem starting around 1895. So they don't even mention 1870. They mention the first one being around 1882 to 1903, with being basically the emigration of Jews from Russia to Palestine. And probably has to do with the pogroms. Yeah.
I found another reference. Let me put it on the screen. Now I do have all these screenshotted from like back in the day, but this is still on the internet because I just looked it up. It looks like this. Google Books, and the reference is Columbia, Star, and Christian Index, volumes 1 and 2. And then there was a quote that was searched, and the quote is, "It is stated that Baron Rothschild, the celebrated London Jewish financier or banker, is about to purchase all of Palestine, the Holy Land, including Jerusalem, as a kingdom for the Jews over whom he is to be king. Now, this is back. What is the date on this? I think this is the 1829 reference, and I'll find the exact date here in a second. Let me just refresh that page.
The big question is, you see a lot of these reports pre 1850, and they're just reports, they're just statements, they're just claims, they're not arguments. They're just, I wish there was some information as to regards as to where they might have heard this, but clearly that there have been a number of outlets that picked this up at the time, and then later on we know hindsight is 2020 in regards to what actually happened. There seems to be some veracity behind this, or wouldn't surprise me.
So this is in this. I'm going to show you the cover page. So I just wanted to show you, like, here's the Columbian Star, and this is a scan of, like, this is the annual scan of, like, the newspapers, right? So this is a newspaper archive from the early 1800s. So let's go back to see what the cover page looks like in this book. Harvard Divinity School. Okay, that's a source for this book that we're looking at, the Columbian Star and Christian Index, Volume 1 from 1829. So now we have two different newspaper reports from 1829. There's this one from 1829, Niles Weekly Register, which is not the same article that is over here in this book, the Columbian Star.
What was so it's 1829, then what was the date on that?
Well, now that we see the cover page, let me reload the page.
Also in November?
Go to page 352 in that book, and then we can go back and see the cover for that week or month of the paper. I mean, there's a date right here on this page, which is like 2 pages before it.
I'm going to assume it's probably
November 28th,
yeah, okay.
1829. So this is is on page 347 of that book. You can see the Columbian Star, Philadelphia, Saturday morning, November 28th, 1829. And we scroll down 1 page, 2 page, 3 page, 4 page. What is there another heading here? No, it's still the same book. It looks like 5 pages, 6 pages down. Page 352 of the Columbia Star. And then we'll go to the next article, and we'll know, from what's in between it, what date it was. But there's the quote. So now we go down the page. Here's the next one. And this is December 12th, 1829. So like probably a week later, number 24, volume 1, number 24.
About 2 weeks.
So we just looked at volume 1, number 23, and I'll go back up to the top. We'll get the exact date one more time, just to be pedantic about it, because November 28th, 1829.
Mm-hmm.
So either this person had a crystal ball. How would somebody at the Philadelphia Columbia Star newspaper have an idea on the objective, political, otherwise, of the Rothschild, Baron Rothschild? And
that's
later,
the big question, right?
Rothschilds
they're just
on their money, right? They have Rothschild on their bills in Israel. They have the main street, in the capital city named after Rothschild. James de Rothschild paid for the Knesset, which is their capital building, where the heads of state all make laws and stuff like that. So it's substantial, and I think that it didn't pop out of nowhere, and there might have been a lot more in the planning than people first are thinking. I don't know.
It's sort of buried even within that article. I mean, it's 6 pages down, right after it talks about recent deaths. So it's sort of like, even within the newspaper, it seems to have been something that was buried at the time.
Yeah, so maybe, I don't know.
It's just a claim.
I don't know what Horton's pointing to with this tweet, but it's just interesting, the history that just we were talking about last night at dinner, and then that tweet today, and there's a lot more to that I think that as just as an example, if Steven Crowder signs with the Daily Wire, could he have done the book deep dive that we just did? And we should get a sound effect like submarine going dive, dive, dive. We need some deep dive sound effects for these types of things. But I don't think Crowder and his $50 million contract with Daily Wire, that's their name, right? DW, could cover a book like this or a book like this. I don't think you could have just had that conversation. I was just reading quotes from 2 memoirs. But I think advertisers might have fled if you were over there at the Daily Wire, right? I don't know.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions. We can get into the show and share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come